The courthouse smelled like old coffee and stress. 17-year-old Daniel walked through the heavy wooden doors, his backpack slung over one shoulder and his sneakers squeaking against the marble floor. He looked around at the tall ceilings and serious faces, feeling completely out of place. This was his first time in a real courtroom, though he'd seen the inside of this building more times than anyone would guess. Judge Rebecca Martinez sat behind the bench, shuffling through a stack of papers. She had that look, the one teachers get when they're already tired of the day before it even starts. Her reading glasses perched on her nose as she glanced at the clock. Another typical Monday morning in municipal court, dealing with small cases that all blurred together after 20 years on the bench. Daniel approached the defendant's table wearing jeans and a gray hoodie that had seen better days. His hair was a bit messy, and he carried a worn notebook under his arm. To everyone in that courtroom, he looked exactly like what they expected. A kid who'd gotten himself into trouble and didn't quite understand the seriousness of what was happening. The bailiff called the case. The People versus Daniel Torres, case number 2024 MC 18763. Unauthorized practice of law. Judge Martinez finally looked up from her papers. Her eyes swept over Daniel with barely concealed disdain. She let out a small sigh, the kind that said she'd already made up her mind about how this would go. "Let me guess," the judge said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You watched a few episodes of some legal drama and decided you were ready to be a lawyer?" A few people in the gallery chuckled. Daniel said nothing, just stood there with his hands clasped in front of him. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man named Robert Hayes, stood up with his briefcase. He looked as bored as the judge, like this case was barely worth his time. "Your Honor, the defendant has been providing legal advice to residents at the Riverside Community Center. He's been telling people how to fight eviction notices, drafting legal documents, and even preparing court filings, all without a law license, of course." Judge Martinez shook her head slowly, making sure everyone could see her disapproval. "Unbelievable." Another internet expert. She looked directly at Daniel. "Young man, do you have any idea how much trouble you're in? The practice of law requires years of education, passing one of the hardest exams in the country, and actual qualifications. You can't just decide you're a lawyer because you read some articles online." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but the judge held up her hand. "I haven't asked you a question yet. Just stand there and listen." The courtroom was filling up now. A few reporters had taken seats in the back, probably expecting a quick story about a misguided teenager. Some law students had wandered in too, always looking for real-world examples to discuss in class. Nobody expected anything interesting from this case. Judge Martinez continued her lecture. "I see kids like you come through here all the time. You think you're smart, you think you know everything, and you think the rules don't apply to you. Well, let me tell you something. The law isn't a game. Real people's lives are affected by legal representation. When someone who isn't qualified gives legal advice, people get hurt. They lose their homes, their money, their rights." She paused for effect, making sure her words sank in. "So before we go any further, I want you to understand the gravity of this situation. You're facing serious penalties here. Fines, community service, and a permanent mark on your record that will follow you around for the rest of your life." Daniel remained perfectly still. His expression didn't change. He didn't look scared or ashamed or even particularly worried. There was something in his eyes, though, something calm and focused that didn't quite match the teenager everyone thought they were seeing. "Your Honor," Daniel said quietly, "I'd like to represent myself in this matter." The courtroom erupted in muffled laughter. Even the court reporter looked up with a smirk. Judge Martinez actually laughed out loud, a sharp bark of amusement. "Oh, this should be good," she said, leaning back in her leather chair. "By all means, counsel." She emphasized the last word mockingly. "Let's see what you've got. I could use some entertainment this morning." More chuckles rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor was grinning now too, already imagining how quickly this would be over. An open and shut case against a kid who didn't know better. But Daniel just nodded politely. He opened his notebook, which was filled with neat handwriting and colorful tabs marking different sections. He pulled out a pen and wrote something down, completely unbothered by the laughter around him. What nobody in that courtroom knew, what they couldn't possibly have guessed, was that Daniel had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. He'd sat in the back of this very courtroom dozens of times, watching Judge Martinez handle cases. He'd studied every ruling she'd made, memorized her preferred procedures, and noted every legal precedent she'd cited from the bench. He knew this judge better than she knew herself. He understood her patterns, her pet peeves, her legal philosophy. And now, standing there in his old sneakers while everyone laughed at him, Daniel was exactly where he wanted to be. The judge had no idea that the teenager she was mocking had already mastered more law than some practicing attorneys. She didn't know about the late nights he'd spent reading case law, or the professors who called him a once-in-a-generation talent. She couldn't see that her entertaining morning was about to become the most challenging case she'd faced in years. Daniel looked up from his notebook and met the judge's eyes. "I'm ready to proceed whenever you are, Your Honor," he said calmly. Judge Martinez waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I'm ready. Let's get this over with. Prosecutor Hayes, present your case. And try not to make it too complicated for our young lawyer here." The courtroom settled in, expecting a quick and predictable show. Nobody was ready for what was about to happen next. Prosecutor Hayes stood up with the confidence of someone who'd won 100 cases just like this one. He buttoned his suit jacket and walked toward the center of the courtroom, carrying a folder stuffed with papers. "Your Honor, this case is straightforward," he began. "The defendant, Daniel Torres, has been operating what amounts to an illegal law practice out of the Riverside Community Center. We have multiple witnesses and extensive documentation proving he engaged in unauthorized practice of law." He pulled out a stack of papers and held them up for everyone to see. These are legal documents the defendant drafted for clients. Eviction defense paperwork, court motions, even settlement agreements, all bearing his signature. All created without a law license. The first witness was called. A woman named Patricia Chen, a social worker at the community center, walked nervously to the witness stand. She was sworn in and sat down, glancing apologetically at Daniel. Hayes wasted no time. "Ms. Chen, can you tell the court what you observed the defendant doing at the community center?" Patricia nodded. He was helping families with legal problems. Eviction notices mostly. He'd sit with them and explain their rights, then help them fill out paperwork. "And did he tell these people he was a lawyer?" Hayes asked. "No, but he acted like one. People trusted him. They thought he knew what he was doing." Hayes smiled. "Thank you. No further questions." Judge Martinez looked at Daniel with raised eyebrows. "Your witness, counselor." The sarcasm in her voice was thick enough to cut. Daniel stood up slowly, picking up his notebook. He walked toward the witness stand with steady steps. Nothing rushed, nothing nervous. The courtroom got quiet, everyone waiting to see this kid embarrass himself. "Ms. Chen," Daniel began, his voice calm and clear. "How long have you worked at the community center?" 8 years. "And in those 8 years, have you seen other people provide legal assistance to community members?" Patricia hesitated. "Well, yes. We've had law students volunteer before and paralegals." Daniel nodded. "Did anyone ever file charges against those law students or paralegals?" "Objection," Hayes called out. "Relevance," Daniel didn't miss a beat. "Your Honor, I'm establishing a pattern of selective enforcement which goes directly to the validity of these charges." Judge Martinez paused. That was actually a valid point, and Daniel had stated it perfectly. She waved her hand. "Overruled. The witness may answer." Patricia shifted in her seat. "No, I don't think anyone was ever charged." "Thank you," Daniel said. "Now, Ms. Chen, you said I acted like a lawyer. Can you be more specific? What exactly did I do?" "You gave people advice about their legal situations." "Did I ever appear in court on anyone's behalf?" "No." "Did I ever charge anyone money?" "No, it was all free." "Did I ever tell anyone I was a licensed attorney?" Patricia shook her head. "No, you were always clear that you were still a student." Daniel walked back to his table and pulled out a document. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter this into evidence. It's California Rules of Professional Conduct, Rule 5.5, regarding the unauthorized practice of law." He handed copies to the judge and prosecutor. Hayes frowned, flipping through the pages quickly. Daniel continued. "This rule clearly states that supervised law students and pre-admission candidates can provide legal assistance under proper supervision. Ms. Chen, was there ever a licensed attorney supervising my work?" "Yes," Patricia said, looking relieved. "Attorney Michael Rodriguez. He reviewed everything you did remotely." The courtroom started buzzing. This wasn't going the way anyone expected. Judge Martinez leaned forward, suddenly much more interested. Daniel wasn't done. "Ms. Chen, The families I helped with eviction defense, do you know what happened to them? Most of them won their cases or got better settlements. So the legal assistance they received was effective and helpful? Very much so. Thank you. No further questions. Patricia stepped down and Hayes called his next witness, a landlord's attorney named Frank Wilson, a man with gray hair and an expensive suit. He looked annoyed to be there. Hayes asked him about the cases where Daniel had helped tenants. Wilson complained that the paperwork was surprisingly sophisticated and that he'd lost cases he should have won easily. When it was Daniel's turn to cross-examine, something shifted in the room. He approached the witness with a different energy now, more focused. Mr. Wilson, you filed the original complaint that led to these charges, didn't you? Wilson straightened his tie. I reported illegal activity, yes. After you lost 3 consecutive eviction cases where my clients had received assistance? That's coincidental. Daniel pulled out more papers. I have the filing dates here. You filed your complaint exactly 2 days after losing the 3rd case. That seems like more than coincidence. Hayes jumped up. Objection. The defendant is badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Martinez said, but she didn't look happy about it. She was staring at Daniel with new eyes now. Daniel switched tactics. Mr. Wilson, in your complaint, you stated that I was operating a law firm. Did you ever see me advertise legal services? No, but did you ever see me collect fees? No. Did you ever see me claim to be a licensed attorney? No, but you were clearly— Thank you, Daniel cut him off smoothly. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce evidence of Mr. Wilson's own history. He's been sanctioned twice for filing frivolous motions and once for discovery violations. The courtroom erupted. Hayes was on his feet shouting objections. Wilson's face turned red. Judge Martinez banged her gavel, but even she looked stunned. Where did you get that information? The judge demanded. Daniel remained calm. Public court records, Your Honor, available to anyone. I'm simply establishing that the complainant has a history of misusing the legal system for personal advantage. Judge Martinez sat back in her chair, studying this teenager who was citing rules and precedents like he'd been practicing law for decades. Her earlier smirk was completely gone now. The reporters in the back were typing frantically on their phones. Hayes called one more witness, but the damage was done. Every question Daniel asked was precise and devastating. He cited statutes from memory, referenced case law without notes, and never once stumbled over legal terminology. By the time Hayes rested his case, the entire courtroom had changed. Nobody was laughing anymore. The law students were staring at Daniel like he was some kind of mystery. Judge Martinez kept glancing at her clerk, silently asking if this was really happening. Daniel returned to his seat and opened his notebook again. He looked perfectly calm, like this was just another day. But everyone watching knew they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. This wasn't some kid playing lawyer. This was someone who actually knew what he was doing, and the case was only getting started. Judge Martinez called for a 15-minute recess. She needed time to think, and honestly, she needed a moment away from the stairs. As soon as she stood up, the courtroom exploded into conversation. Everyone was talking about the kid in the hoodie who was arguing like a seasoned lawyer. In her chambers, the judge sat down heavily in her chair and rubbed her temples. Her clerk, a young woman named Lisa, knocked softly and entered. Your Honor, I think you need to see this, Lisa said, holding out a tablet. What is it? I looked up the defendant. Judge, you need to read this. Judge Martinez took the tablet and started scrolling. Her eyes widened with every line. Daniel Torres wasn't just some smart kid. He was 17 years old and had already finished his undergraduate degree through an accelerated program. At 15, he'd scored a perfect 180 on the LSAT, a test that makes grown adults cry. The average score is around 150, and anything above 170 is considered exceptional. A perfect score is almost unheard of, but it got better, or worse, depending on how you looked at it. Daniel had been admitted to Harvard Law School at 16 years old. Because of age restrictions, he couldn't formally enroll as a regular student, but the school had created a special program just for him. He'd been taking classes remotely, working under the supervision of 3 professors who were all considered experts in their fields. There were articles about him in legal journals, news stories from 2 years ago calling him a prodigy, letters of recommendation from judges and attorneys that read like love letters to his potential, and then the part that made Judge Martinez's stomach drop. Daniel had already passed the baby bar exam in California, one of the toughest preliminary tests in the country. He was scheduled to take the full bar exam in 3 months, right after his 18th birthday. "Oh no," the judge whispered. Lisa nodded grimly. "There's more. The community center work? It wasn't unauthorized. He was working under the supervision of attorney Michael Rodriguez, who's licensed and has a stellar reputation. Everything Daniel did was reviewed and approved. It's all documented." Judge Martinez put her head in her hands. Every sarcastic comment she'd made that morning was part of the official court record. Every mocking laugh, every dismissive gesture, all of it recorded for posterity. And she'd done it to someone who probably knew more about the law than half the attorneys who practiced in her courtroom. "The press is already picking this up," Lisa added quietly. "There are 3 reporters out there, and I saw someone live tweeting the proceedings." The judge looked up. "Live tweeting?" The hashtag is already trending locally. "Teen genius destroys prosecutor" or something like that. Judge Martinez stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. 20 years on the bench, and she'd never felt quite this foolish. She'd judged someone based on his age and appearance, and now it was coming back to haunt her. "What do I do?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. Lisa shrugged. "Be fair. That's all you can do now." The judge nodded slowly. "Send word that we're coming back in session." When everyone returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had completely changed. Word had spread during the recess. More people had crowded into the gallery, including several attorneys who'd heard something interesting was happening. The law students were all paying close attention now, phones hidden but definitely recording. Judge Martinez took her seat and looked directly at Daniel. Her tone was different now, more measured. "Mr. Torres, I understand you have evidence to present?" "Yes, Your Honor," Daniel said, standing up. He picked up a folder from his table, much thicker than the prosecutor's had been. "Before we proceed," the judge said carefully, "I want to acknowledge that this court may have made some premature judgments this morning. I apologize for any inappropriate comments." The courtroom went silent. Judges almost never apologize from the bench. Hayes looked confused, glancing between the judge and Daniel. Daniel nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate that." He opened his folder and began laying out his defense piece by piece. First came the documentation of his legal education, transcripts from Harvard showing straight A's in courses like constitutional law, civil procedure, and legal writing, letters from his supervising professors praising his work. Then came the proof of supervision. Email chains between Daniel and attorney Rodriguez, showing how every single document Daniel created was reviewed before being used. Phone records proving weekly consultation calls. Even video recordings of their discussions about complex cases. "Your Honor," Daniel explained, "California law specifically allows law students and pre-admission candidates to provide legal services under proper supervision. I've complied with every requirement, every single one." He handed the judge a thick document. "This is the formal agreement between attorney Rodriguez and myself, filed with the state bar. It outlines the scope of my permitted activities and the supervision requirements. Everything I did at the community center fell within these guidelines." Hayes was frantically flipping through his own papers, trying to find some angle, but Daniel wasn't finished. "I'd also like to address the selective enforcement issue," Daniel continued. He pulled out a chart, professionally made with graphs and statistics. "Over the past 3 years, there have been 47 documented cases of law students and paralegals providing similar services at other community centers in this jurisdiction. Not a single one was prosecuted. Not one." He presented the data showing dates, locations, and the names of the students involved, all properly researched, all verifiable. "The only difference between those cases and mine," Daniel said, his voice steady, "is that I helped families successfully defend against evictions filed by attorneys like Mr. Wilson. I have evidence showing that my prosecution was initiated specifically because I was effective at my work, not because I broke any laws." He laid out more documents. Emails from Wilson to the prosecutor's office pushing for charges. Dates showing the complaint came immediately after Daniel had helped defeat Wilson's cases. Even a recording of Wilson at a property owners meeting, complaining about some kid making our jobs harder. The courtroom was absolutely riveted. This wasn't just a defense anymore. Daniel was systematically dismantling the entire case against him, while simultaneously exposing the motivations behind his prosecution. Judge Martinez read through the documents carefully. Her face showed a mix of emotions: embarrassment, respect, and something that might have been admiration. This teenager had outprepared everyone in the room. He'd anticipated every argument, gathered every piece of evidence, and presented it all with the skill of an experienced litigator. Hayes stood up, looking defeated. "Your Honor, the state would like to request a recess to review this new evidence." Daniel spoke up quickly. "Your Honor, this isn't new evidence. All of this was available to the prosecution before charges were filed. They chose not to investigate properly." The judge looked at Hayes with disappointment. "He's right. This is all public record or easily discoverable. Why wasn't this reviewed before we came to trial?" Hayes had no good answer. He sat down, and for the first time that day he looked genuinely worried. Daniel returned to his seat, but everyone in that courtroom knew what had just happened. The kid they'd all laughed at that morning had just taught them all a lesson about assumptions, preparation, and the real meaning of justice. Daniel stood up again, but this time there was a different energy in his movements. He'd defended himself perfectly, proven his innocence beyond any doubt, but he wasn't done yet. "Not even close, Your Honor. I'd like to file a motion to dismiss these charges with prejudice," he said clearly. Judge Martinez nodded slowly. "On what grounds?" "Selective enforcement and prosecutorial misconduct." Daniel pulled out yet another folder. The man had come prepared with an entire filing cabinet worth of evidence. "I can prove that this prosecution was initiated, not because I violated the law, but because I was effective at helping people. That's not justice. That's retaliation." Hayes shot to his feet. "Your Honor, that's a serious accusation." "It's a serious situation," Daniel replied calmly. He walked forward and handed documents to both the judge and prosecutor. "These are text messages between Mr. Wilson and Assistant District Attorney Hayes, dated 3 weeks before charges were filed." The color drained from Hayes's face. Judge Martinez started reading, and her expression grew darker with each line. Daniel continued his explanation. "In these messages, Mr. Wilson explicitly asks Mr. Hayes to find a way to stop that kid at the community center. Mr. Hayes responds by suggesting they could pursue unauthorized practice charges. There's even a message where Wilson offers to make a donation to Hayes's campaign fund." The courtroom erupted. The reporters were practically falling over themselves to write this down. The law students in the back were staring with their mouths open. This had gone from a simple case to a full-blown scandal. "Your Honor, I can explain," Hayes stammered. Judge Martinez held up her hand, her face like stone. "You'll have your chance, Mr. Hayes. Right now, I want to hear what else Mr. Torres has to say." Daniel took a breath. This was the moment he'd been building toward. "I've also compiled data on eviction cases in this jurisdiction over the past 5 years. The numbers tell a disturbing story." He displayed a chart on a portable screen he'd brought with him. The graphs showed clear trends. Families without legal representation lost eviction cases 92% of the time. Families with representation won or settled favorably 68% of the time. In the 8 months I worked at the community center, I helped 43 families, Daniel explained. 38 of them avoided eviction or negotiated better terms. That's an 88% success rate, and every single one of those cases was against properties represented by attorneys in Mr. Wilson's network. He let that sink in for a moment. This prosecution isn't about protecting the public from unauthorized practice. It's about protecting certain attorneys from competition. It's about making sure poor families can't access legal help that might actually work. The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the sounds of traffic outside seemed to have stopped. Everyone was listening to this 17-year-old kid explain how the system had been rigged. Daniel walked back to his table and picked up one more document. "I have statements here from 12 of the families I helped. They're willing to testify about how the legal assistance they received changed their lives. Mrs. Chen kept her apartment and didn't have to move her disabled son to a different school district. The Rodriguez family avoided homelessness during the winter. The Johnsons discovered their landlord had been illegally charging them fees and got $3,000 in refunds." He held up the papers. "These are real people, Your Honor. Real families who would have lost everything if they'd faced those eviction proceedings alone. And this court is prosecuting me for helping them." Judge Martinez was reading through the text messages again, her jaw clenched tight. Hayes looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Daniel wasn't finished, though. He had one more card to play. "Your Honor, I'd also like to point," out that this selective prosecution may constitute a civil rights violation under Section 1983 by targeting legal assistance to low-income families while ignoring similar activities by others. The prosecution has effectively denied these families equal access to justice. That was the nuclear option, and everyone in the room knew it. If Daniel pursued that angle, this could become a federal case. Hayes could lose his job. The entire prosecutor's office could face an investigation. Hayes finally found his voice. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss all charges against Mr. Torres." "You think?" Judge Martinez said icily. She'd gone from mocking Daniel to being furious at her own prosecutor. "Mr. Hayes, we're going to have a very long conversation in my chambers after this, and you might want to call your union representative." She turned to Daniel and her expression softened slightly. "Mr. Torres, I owe you more than an apology. What you've presented here today is exactly the kind of lawyering this system needs more of. You've exposed serious problems in how justice is administered in this jurisdiction." Daniel nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor, but if I may, I'd like to say something else." "Go ahead." He turned to face the entire courtroom. The reporters, the law students, the random people who'd wandered in expecting a boring Monday morning. "This case isn't just about me. It's about the thousands of families who face legal problems without any way to fight back. It's about a system that's supposed to provide justice but often provides it only to people who can afford expensive lawyers." His voice grew stronger. "I got lucky. I had teachers who recognized something in me and helped me learn. I had professors who took a chance on a kid who was too young for their program. I had Attorney Rodriguez who believed I could do good work, but most people don't get those chances." He pointed to the evidence spread across the table. "Every piece of paper here represents someone who needed help and couldn't afford a $1,000 retainer. They came to the community center because it was free and because they had nowhere else to go. And when someone finally helped them, the system tried to shut that help down." The courtroom was absolutely riveted. This wasn't a closing argument in a trial anymore. This was a speech about something bigger. "Your Honor, dismissing the charges against me is the right thing to do," Daniel said. "But it's not enough. We need to make sure this doesn't happen to the next person who tries to help. We need programs that train people to provide legal assistance under supervision. We need community centers with real resources. We need a system that doesn't punish people for making justice more accessible." Judge Martinez sat back in her chair, studying this remarkable young man. He'd come into her courtroom in a hoodie and sneakers, and she'd dismissed him as just another troubled kid. Now he was teaching her about justice. "Mr. Torres," she said slowly, "what exactly are you proposing?" Daniel reached into his backpack and pulled out a bound document, easily 50 pages thick. He'd prepared for this moment too, just like he'd prepared for everything else. "I'm proposing a supervised legal aid program," he said, handing copies to the judge and court clerk. "It would allow qualified law students and pre-bar candidates to provide basic legal services under attorney supervision. Everything would be documented, regulated, and completely transparent." Judge Martinez flipped through the pages, her eyebrows rising higher with each section. This wasn't some rough idea scribbled on notebook paper. This was a complete program proposal with budgets, oversight procedures, training requirements, and quality control measures. "This is remarkably thorough," the judge said. "I've been working on it for 8 months," Daniel explained. "I consulted with professors, practicing attorneys, and legal aid organizations across the country. I even got feedback from the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee, though they don't know it was written by someone my age." A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom, but it was different now. Warmer. People weren't laughing at him anymore. They were laughing with him, Daniel continued. "The program would cost about $60,000 a year to run, which is less than what this county spends on a single assistant prosecutor. It could help anywhere from 300 to 500 families annually. The return on investment is obvious. Fewer people become homeless, fewer kids have to change schools, fewer families end up in the shelter system." Judge Martinez was nodding as she read. "You've thought of everything. Liability insurance, complaint procedures, supervision ratios?" "Of course," Daniel said simply. "If we're going to do this, we should do it right." Hayes had been sitting quietly, but now he spoke up, his voice small. "Your Honor, I formally move to dismiss all charges against Daniel Torres with prejudice. The state acknowledges that this prosecution was improperly motivated and should never have been filed." The judge looked at him with cold eyes. "Motion granted. Mr. Hayes, you and I will be meeting with the district attorney this afternoon. Bring your files on how this case was initiated." She banged her gavel once. "All charges against Daniel Torres are dismissed with prejudice. This court also orders the prosecutor's office to issue a formal apology and to expunge all records of this case from the defendant's record." The courtroom erupted in applause. The reporters were already typing furiously on their phones. The law students were cheering. Even the bailiff was smiling, but Judge Martinez wasn't done. She waited for the noise to die down, then looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Torres, I don't normally do this, but these aren't normal circumstances. I'm asking you to work with this court to implement the program you've proposed. I'll personally bring it to the county board and push for funding. We need this. This community needs this." Daniel's composure finally cracked a little. His eyes got shiny and he had to blink a few times. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'd be honored to help. There's one condition, though," the judge added. "You have to promise me something." "What's that?" "When you pass the bar exam in 3 months, and I have no doubt you will, you'll remember this day. Remember these families you helped. Remember why you started doing this work in the first place. Because lawyers like you, the ones who actually care about justice, are the ones this system desperately needs." Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice to speak. The judge stood up. "Court is adjourned." As soon as she left the bench, people swarmed Daniel. The law students wanted to shake his hand and ask him questions. The reporters wanted interviews. Several attorneys who'd been watching gave him their business cards, telling him to call them when he got his license. One of the families Daniel had helped, Mrs. Chen, was waiting near the back of the courtroom with tears streaming down her face. She pushed through the crowd and hugged him. "You did it," she said. "Not just for yourself, for all of us." Over the next few days, the story exploded. Local news picked it up first, then regional outlets, then national media. "Teen genius exposes court corruption while defending himself," read one headline. 17-year-old teaches judge a lesson in justice, said another. The video clips from the courtroom went viral. Daniel's speech about access to justice was shared hundreds of thousands of times. Law schools across the country started reaching out, offering him positions and scholarships, though he was already committed to Harvard. But the real impact was quieter and more meaningful. The county board approved funding for Daniel's proposed legal aid program within 2 weeks, the fastest budget approval in the county's history. They couldn't say no, not with cameras watching and the public demanding action. Attorney Rodriguez formally hired Daniel as a law clerk for the summer, giving him even more experience before he took the bar exam. 3 other community centers contacted them about starting similar programs. Hayes resigned from the prosecutor's office amid the investigation. Wilson faced his own ethics review from the state bar. Judge Martinez became an unexpected advocate for legal aid reform, speaking at conferences about the lessons she'd learned from underestimating a 17-year-old. 3 months later, Daniel sat for the bar exam. It was held in a massive convention center with hundreds of other candidates, all of them older than him. He was still the youngest person in the room, still got a few surprised looks. But this time nobody was laughing. He finished the 2-day exam feeling confident. The questions were hard, brutally hard, but he'd prepared for them. He'd always prepared. 6 weeks after that, the results came. Daniel had passed with one of the highest scores in the state's history. He was officially a lawyer at 18 years old, one of the youngest ever licensed in California. His first case as a licensed attorney, representing a family facing eviction at the community center where it all started. He won. The hoodie and sneakers were still his courtroom outfit sometimes, though he did buy one decent suit for special occasions. He figured if people wanted to underestimate him based on his clothes, that was their problem, not his. Judge Martinez kept a photo on her desk, one the court photographer had taken on that memorable Monday morning. It showed Daniel standing at the defendant's table in his gray hoodie, surrounded by papers, looking calm and prepared while she sat on the bench looking skeptical. She kept it there as a reminder. A reminder not to judge books by their covers, a reminder that justice sometimes comes from unexpected places, and a reminder that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who end up teaching you the most important lessons. Daniel went on to help hundreds of families over the next few years. He became known not just for his brilliant legal mind, but for his commitment to making the law work for everyone, not just those who could afford it. And it all started in a courtroom where a judge made the mistake of mocking a teenager in a hoodie, never imagining that the kid standing before her would change everything.